You are listening to the Kelly Confidential podcast with Kelly Wilkes. This is episode 35. Welcome to the Kelly Confidential Show, where we talk negotiation essentials and those crucial conversations empowering extraordinary women. Real women, real issues. Let's jump in. Welcome back, friends, and thanks for being here. On the show today is a special guest who first appeared with me on Kelly Confidential last year to talk with us about existentialism and leadership, the need for true empathy and authenticity, and how okay it is to be vulnerable as a leader. It really resonated with listeners in a post-COVID world affected still by so much disruption, change, and uncertainty. It was thought-provoking and reassuring for many. I'm speaking of Monica Hanaway. I first met Monica 8 years ago when I enrolled in the mediation accreditation course at Regent's College London, where Monica co-facilitated the program with Diana Mitchell and the late Paul Randolph, and I instantly liked her. It was a tough program, to be sure, but I remember feeling very safe with Monica and inspired because she just knew so much about how people can successfully navigate conflict. She is a true people whisperer, and so she should be. Monica is an accredited mediator, a psychotherapist, a clinical supervisor, and author of several books. She is also a senior lecturer for the accredited mediation course hosted annually at Jesus College, Oxford, a program which she has co-facilitated for years from its early origins at Regent's. Today, we're exploring the role of culture in mediation. What a topic. I can't wait. Welcome back, Monica. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you, Kelly. Yeah, lovely sunny day here.
Yes, it is. I was just thinking the bird outside is very loud and chirpy, but that's a nice problem to have,
Yeah.
given all of our rain this spring. And lovely to see you. And I wish everybody could see Monica because she's in a beautiful red outfit with matching glasses, and it's very glamorous.
That's very flattering of you.
Well, it is. But it goes with your personality too. If people know you, it's vibrant. I think it matches your personality. And so, I'm really glad to have you back. We speak often, and we were speaking not too long ago about culture. And so here we are today to cover that. And I think this is such a great topic for people in mediation and conflict resolution, of course, but really for anybody who is running a business, who is in a position of leadership.
Yeah.
This is such an important topic.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I've been a mediator for over 20 years, and it struck me that I've never actually heard a discussion about culture within those circles, even with those people who are teaching mediation, where you would think there'd be an interest in research and looking at what else can be built into the mediation process. So in terms of mediation, I think it's an area that hasn't been explored and needs to be.
Yeah.
But going back to what you said about the broader context, I take culture in a very broad sense. So within that, I include cultures that are around gender differences, cultures around racial differences, social class differences. They all have cultures attached to them. And if we think about what causes conflict or dispute, it's usually misunderstanding.
Yes.
And that is because, absolutely, about what we assume, how we work in stereotypes, Research says that within 7 seconds of meeting somebody, we've made an assessment of them.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's usually based, for most people, on how you think there's a commonality with you. So it's much easier to kind of think, oh, I'll get on with that person because you see or you perceive there to be a commonality. Now, that could be right or wrong. So to give you an example, my first degree was in fine art. My first day, I arrived straight from a convent grammar school, quite naive, looked around, lots of groovy people. And it was the date when groovy was a term that was used often.
Yeah.
And I looked around and I thought, oh my God, there's all these worldly wide people here. They're going to make mincemeat out of me. I don't know what they're going to make. Looked round. There was a similar looking young woman, so long straight hair, flared jeans, same as me. Uniform was the same. She gave her name. It had an Irish origin, which my name had. And I thought, oh, she's probably more like me. She's probably been, had the nuns talk to her, and etc. So I kind of gravitated towards her. Now, it turned out that actually she was Irish, but she'd become pregnant at 14, been shipped out of Ireland, and had a 4-year-old son.
Wow.
At the time I met her. So, in fact, our commonality was extremely small.
It's extremely limited, yeah.
Yes. So this is a danger that what we do, not just in dispute situations, but in life, is we make huge assumptions and huge, hopes that this person will be like me or this person is different, therefore it will be difficult.
Yes.
So I think the whole issue of culture in its broadest sense is very important, how we understand society and how society can see what causes conflict.
It's just so, I'm kind of getting goosebumps here. It's just such an important conversation to have and to have with ourselves, really.
Yes.
Especially with the backdrop of such significant unrest in so many different parts of the world right now, where cultures are clashing.
Yes.
And which is giving license for other conflicts elsewhere.
Yeah.
And yeah, gosh, this is such a good introduction. Well, so let's start to unpack some of this. And so if we think about, let's stay in the lane of mediation for a moment. If we think about conflict resolution and mediation as a discipline, why is it so critical right now that mediators and negotiators that they consider culture?
I mean, I have to say that my approach to mediation is very much psychologically based. So it has a depth to it which is about understanding different worldviews. So it starts there rather than starting with the problem. It starts with the people and trying to understand the people in the dispute. It's existentially informed, which I'm not going to go into great details about what that means, but one of the key concepts of that is that we are all unique and our uniqueness should be celebrated. But within that, we're all thrown into the world. We don't have a choice about being here, and we don't have a choice about where we land up being born. So we have to live within the context we find ourselves, and we will find ourselves in a concentric circle of cultures. A family culture, a school culture, a business culture, a geographical culture, religious culture, racial culture, sexual culture. It is, that's what makes us. Now that for me is extremely exciting.
Mm-hmm.
I love the complexity of it. For a lot of people, it is quite scary. And that's true of a lot of mediators. So a lot of mediators want to see the parties in a dispute as just logical human beings.
Yeah.
They're not. We're not. Humanity is
No.
not logical. We wouldn't have wars. We wouldn't have any disputes at all if we were logical and rational. Because all disputes are because it's affected us emotionally and it's affected our values and beliefs. We go to war because some country has done something which goes against our beliefs in the broadest sense. We argue with our friends because our self-esteem is affected, or all sorts of things which are not factual and they're not transactional. So whatever the dispute, there is a really deeper area that needs to be explored for it to be meaningfully resolved. So you can get a resolution fairly quickly working on a logical, rational basis. But my belief is it will unravel because it's not actually touched
Grounded
what's
in
really
it.
going on.
Yeah.
So it's like, you have a headache, you take a paracetamol, it will lift the headache. But what we haven't looked at is, why have you got a headache? It may be contextual. It might be that there's something stressful going on. It may be you've got a brain tumour. So lots of mediation is concerned with giving you the paracetamol and you will get a resolution.
Yeah.
But if you've not looked at the underlying issues, many of which are cultural, as I would define culture in that very broad sense, you will not actually solve anything. You will make a temporary sticking plaster, which is why we see so often in the political sphere that there are mediations, they work, and then, of course, it resurfaces because
it unravels.
The actual issues haven't been addressed.
No. Yeah, that's such an important point and relevant. And we can probably see this in schools, in businesses, where, as you say, they might strike a deal to resolve whatever dispute or conflict is going on. Because most people do want to try and reach a chord of some point just to get on with their lives. And so they may agree to those superficial terms. But as you say, it then unravels because the deeper probably distrust and impact to their value system hasn't been addressed, as you say.
And a lot of the mediations I've done in the workplace is where there is some kind of tension between the individual's culture and their values and that of the organisation.
Okay.
And that becomes more common when there's a change in the organisational structure. If there's a new CEO or there's an amalgamation, then you get lots of different cultures. And people do not understand one another. They expect to, because I work quite a lot with global companies, and they go, oh, we've amalgamated with this company in a different country. And I'll ask, have you been out and spent some time there? There are small things. Like there's a lot of organisations now outsourcing IT stuff to Poland, particularly, but other places. And they'll have a dispute because they'll go, well, the person wasn't there on the day. I expected them to be there because culturally, within the Polish business system, you can ask for leave on the day you want it. And that's not understood. So even simple, very small things about the lack of willingness to think, I'm engaging with a different culture here, not to assume that they know the rules that you're playing by. And why shouldn't you know what the rules are that they're playing by, and have that discussion? So there's a laziness, in my view, that goes on within the business world about what are we taking on here when we're working globally, because we're working with different cultures. So, you can look at the political thing where it's written large, the cultural issues, but on a very micro level, we've got cultural issues that cause disagreements, misunderstandings.
And what are you seeing with some of your clients, and I guess even just with the naked eye and your experience as a mediator? Are you seeing that the conflicts are widening, or in some ways, I guess what I've sort of observed, and I'm very keen to get yours, are they galvanizing? Are the conflicts sort of coming together and galvanizing into bigger conflicts because of unsettled distrust and cultural challenges elsewhere in the world?
Yes.
Are you seeing this increasing, or is it kind of staying the same? What experiences are you having?
It's really hard to say, because it feels like it's increasing. It definitely feels like it's increasing. But is that to do with the access we have to the news, so that we're more aware of it? Were all those things always going on, but we didn't know? And I don't know the answer to that, but we don't seem to be getting better. We don't seem to be getting better at avoiding it, So whether it's growing or whether it's just static, I don't see that we're getting better at all. And on the political level, you've got the whole issue of, when we vote, what the timing is, and that things will be. When I was working in South Africa, in the townships, which are still there, and there are still miles of them, and it's still shocking. I remember a taxi driver saying to me, "Oh well, they're all lit up at the moment. They've got lighting, but that's because we've got an election coming."
That's extraordinary.
So there's all sorts of issues that overlay. About why people will suddenly put energy into trying to mediate or trying to resolve conflict. And some of them are really good and honourable reasons, others less so. They are to do with ego-led politics, if I can put it that way as a shorthand.
And so if you are a mediator, and whether professionally or you are working to resolve conflict within a business, a corporation, why would overlooking culture, whether it's a business culture, a gender culture, or a heritage type culture, how will that create problems in your attempts to resolve that conflict? What sort of symptoms would they see by not really tucking into that early on?
Well, I don't know about symptoms. I'm just trying to think that with all disputes, again, it's not what's going on the surface. And one has to understand that the world views of whoever you're working with, now they will be cultural with a small c. We gather our world views as we grow up, as we develop, as we move on in life. We gather our values, we gather our politics, we gather all those things. Now, most mediators would say, well, I don't need to know anything about all of that. It's about the dispute. Let's not waste time. Let's get down to the point. What's the bottom line here? Let's sort it out. And as I said earlier, that can work. You can do that. You can, in some ways, force through a resolution.
Yeah.
And people may be happy with it, but quite often they're not. They're just agreeing to it because they want to move on.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't address, if you want to say the symptom, it addresses the symptoms, but it doesn't it's not the underlying cause.
Mm-hmm.
So you need to be patient, and businesses are not patient. Countries are not patient. We want things quickly. Western society is not patient. We're very fast. We want results. And you have to put in time to explore what it is that the person is bringing into the dispute.
Yeah.
And that will essentially be cultural. And often it is about a sense of being misunderstood and disrespected. And if you ignore those aspects, if you don't look at what is going on psychologically for both parties, you will miss the essential conflict. You'll be dealing with something else. You'll be dealing with the symptom of the conflict. And my belief is that it will surface elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And quite often the problem is that they then will not go back to mediation again because it will have been unsatisfactory, even though they got a resolution. The mediator won't necessarily know it's been unsatisfactory.
Right, because they may not, they may never
they come away.
Yeah,
they will never hear. They will come away with agreement. That's the end of their job. I quite often hear, because companies that I mediate for ask me to go in and train or coach, and I will get feedback about how mediations have gone. But also the very fact that they will usually, after mediation, invite me back to do some consultancy work or some coaching work or some training work shows that we are actually addressing more than just the one disagreement.
Right.
That we have, through the work, through the mediation, picked up that there are some cultural issues within the organisation that need addressing in some way.
Okay. So what advice, some simple steps could they take early in the mediation to get to know their clients a little bit better and to start that journey into understanding their culture and their values early in the discussion rather than leaving it or skipping it altogether?
Yeah. I think it's being open and curious. That's how you should enter a mediation, not about trying to close it down quickly and get an agreement. And also to address cultural differences in the room. So if I'm working with people who are quite clearly bringing in cultures that I know nothing about, I will name that in the pre-mediation. So even if it's just that I, as a white woman, am working with a black guy, I will say, how does that feel? Are you happy with a mediator who is a white woman? Because I've worked with harassment cases, where it's a white woman in dispute with, and it's, to duck that feels really inauthentic. So a starting point to acknowledge where there are very clear cultural differences, and to remember that even where they don't appear to be, there will be. So being open and curious, and in the pre-mediation, which doesn't happen on the day, it happens maybe a week before, to just say, tell me a bit about yourself. Before we talk about what's bringing you to mediation, tell me a bit about you. And that gives permission, once they do come into the mediation day, to be more personal, to go deeper, and to be more truthful. I think it builds trust.
And validates who they are.
Yeah.
That they
and
feel
who
this is a
you
safe
are.
place. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, who you are as a mediator too, that you're a person. You know, a mediator is meant to be non-judgmental, meant to be neutral. We can never truly be that because we have our own personal values and cultures. And if people in mediation are speaking about things that we don't agree with, we have to acknowledge to ourselves that there's a cultural clash between ourselves and one of the disputants. And through practice, we have to learn to bracket that, to say, okay, these are my truths. I don't have to alter them. I don't have to fight for them. What I have to do is understand the other person's truth. And to work with that. I had somebody come in to a session, and there was a noise outside. It was the room I was working in. It was bamboo outside, and you could hear it on the window.
Right.
And the guy he said to me, "Oh, that's my grandmother," because part of his cultural heritage was that his ancestors lived in the nature that surrounded.
Wow.
So, you know, I said, "Oh, what do you think she is saying?" And he said, "She's wanting to keep an eye on me. She's wanting to protect me." And I just said, "That's wonderful. Do you want to invite her in the room? Are you happy with how it feels?" And we just left it. And they said, "No, that's fine." You know, so we left it at that. It was like, that is valuing his cultural belief. It wasn't part of the dispute, but it helped me to understand who he was, the depth of his spiritual self.
And how I'm just imagining this exchange, and I'm just sitting here thinking how powerful for you to take the time to acknowledge that back to him by saying, "Oh, you know, what do you think she's saying?" Because as you say, so many people would be like, "Oh, well, moving on swiftly, you know, that's a bit odd." And it's that impatience and empathy thing. And I think how powerful for this man to hear from you, "Oh, what is she saying?" I mean, it instantly validates him. And he must have felt so heard. And then for you to say, you know, "Shall we invite her in to this session?" That's so powerful, because it just really must be so grounding for the other person.
Yeah. And not only that, just think how great it is for the mediator to actually understand that that person, when you're going to be in the joint sessions, that for them family is important, that they have a sense of duty not just to themselves. So their culture is not about getting what they can for them out of the mediation. There's also something about making the family proud of them. That there's all of that in there. And you've got a day which is both kind of no time at all and a long time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't distract at all from the ability to settle it in the end, and settle it in quite a formal way, if necessary, with the heads of agreement, signatures, etc., without exploring those issues. And the point at which we feel as mediators there's movement is when people feel that their individual worldview, and I'm using that as shorthand for culture really, is understood enough by the mediator, because you're not going to get full understanding. You've kind of validated their uniqueness. And disputes are always about perceptions. They're not about facts. If they're about facts, they get sorted quickly, logically, rationally. There wouldn't be a dispute that goes on for years. It's because there's an emotional and psychological misunderstanding that's gone on.
Mm-hmm.
So by understanding the individuals in the dispute and allowing them to explore the differences with you, you can then move on to explore the commonalities between the disputants.
Mm-hmm.
And there will always be commonalities.
Mm-hmm.
They might just both want the best for the company, or they both want war to stop because their families are being killed.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
you can't go straight there, because if you go looking for empathy early, that's being really disrespectful of the difference.
Yeah.
You have to explore the difference, and then it's like, and given all that, given that your experiences are so different, and it might just be to do with class differences, power differences, financial what are the commonalities here?
Mm-hmm.
One commonality is this dispute is taking part of your life away.
Mm-hmm.
The other is it's very uncomfortable. What other commonalities are there? And so you move them from this place where they are occupying alien labels to each other to a place of, that's all true, we do have our differences, but as humans we all share certain fears and hopes.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're moving through, and it sounds very, I don't know, wishy-washy, very kind of philosophical, but it's very grounded. And it's also, it is a process. You're, as a mediator, it's like, I need to understand the individuals before I can help them to understand each other.
Yes.
And I have to put the effort and time in to do that.
Yeah. I think if I draw a parallel, I think about, I've been doing a lot of reading about trade wars lately, randomly, and about Boeing and Airbus's 17-year trade war over government subsidies that they were fighting over, the U.S. Market versus the European market, and the government subsidies that each company was enjoying. And I just found it extraordinary that went on for 17 years and they just could not reach agreement. And I think the mediators and the lawyers would like to think that, they eventually cracked that nut, but it's not true. I think what happened was that China really started to enter the market with their own products for aviation. But what was interesting about that, about China's entrance, was, to your point, you firstly have to recognize their differences. So Airbus and Boeing were unique and different in that they were built by unique and different markets in different cultures, serving different customer profiles. And sure, they sold airplanes, so they had that in common, and they would probably say they were very special and unique in their own way. But where the commonality really came together was when China, as a competitor to both of them, showed up on the scene.
Yeah.
And then they were like, okay, we're about to lose major market share if we don't sort ourselves out. So I think I absolutely understand your point there, and the relevance about being respectful of their differences first.
And different needs. Mm-hmm. Because, there's a lovely little story that's used a lot in mediation training about a brother and a sister fighting over the one orange in the house. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't only one orange, and they said, oh, well, we'll cut it in half. No, I need the whole orange. Yeah. And actually, the reason was that one of them, the little boy, needed actually the peel because he was using it in a craft thing. He needed to make a mask out of it. He had no interest in the inner bit of the orange. The girl wanted the inner bit of the orange because she wanted to make juice. Mm. So the wants were totally different, but nobody actually explored. It was like, well, just chop it down the middle. That's
Yes.
that's the obvious solution. But it's what is it that it means? What is it that the orange means? What is it that the dispute's about? And to your point, Louis Koza has written a lot on conflict, talks about social conflict and how it both bonds and it divides. Because, if resources are limited, whatever the resource is, whether it's an orange or it's government subsidies, what we tend to do as human beings is we go, well, who am I the most like? And I'll bond with them against the other. And so we make the other, as in our mindset, as different as possible from us. And the us can be two people who felt very different up until the third party comes in. And yet we don't go, what is it that the need is? What is the cultural need? What is the individual need? Are we actually all fighting over the same thing? Perhaps not.
Yeah. That's, again, so interesting. And I guess the big question there is, how important is matching the mediator with the client's culture?
Now, there has been a lot of work done on this, and it's been done in other fields as well, to do with therapists, coaches, etc. And I actually think you can work better. I can only speak for myself. Because I'm quite a nosy person, I like to really understand where people come from. I think I can be a better mediator, a better coach, a better therapist, where there isn't an immediate sense of, oh, this person's like me. Because actually that can make you really lazy. Because we assume, oh, I know this, I know how this woman will think. And we don't. If I'm faced with somebody whose experiences are very different from my own, then I need to find out about those.
Yeah.
I can't assume that I know. And so there are two conflicting views. I mean, one is very much that it's much better to have a mediator of the same culture. But what do we mean by that? If you look at, geographical areas, they come from the same root. So there's a lot of countries that are in dispute with one another will have a cultural heritage that's very similar. So what are the differences?
Yeah.
And as a mediator, what do you do then? So if you come in and go, well, I was born in this country, why would that mean that I understood the people in the dispute?
Yeah.
Because I might have been born in that country from a very rich family and had one kind of experience of that country's culture, which was based on being rich. And I might have an entirely different experience of that country's culture if I come from a poor background, for example.
Yeah.
So it's a bit superficial, I think, to kind of try and do this match up. It's more to do with, I think, mediators working harder to be willing to engage with, tell me about it.
Yes.
Tell me about it. Let me understand as far as I possibly can. And we cannot understand another person 100%. We cannot, because we've not lived their life. We can just get as close as we can. And I've had clients who come to me and said, I didn't want a mediator from my own culture.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah. Because the things that I'm going to say would not be well received within my culture.
Okay.
And that's from a number of different cultural backgrounds. It's more to do with the attitude of the mediator, I think, than trying to make a kind of on-paper match.
Yeah. And Oh, I have so many questions about this. So, I mean, how is that received amongst mediators? Because I can
Yeah,
see, as you say, there's maybe a bit of a laziness to it, and an assumption that it will make it more straightforward if the cultures do match, and that somehow makes it important. But actually, it's a slippery slope because it makes it easier for them to get into the superficial
yeah,
dispute and not
yes,
actually tackle the underlying conflict.
yeah.
Um, so, what coaching would you give mediators to resist the temptation to go with that case file where it's their same demographic?
Yeah. I think it's something that needs to happen that isn't happening, which is that the whole mediation community take on board that there is cultural difference, and there will always be cultural difference. So it's lazy again to assume that a party that might be many different people that seem to be putting themselves forward as a group will not have within it cultural differences, because it will.
Yeah.
But it was the absence of there being anything being offered around training or coaching for mediators in this area that led to me I ran a course in February, which was the first one, which was on the role of culture in mediation. I had no idea how it would go, but I thought, let's just get it out there in the ether that this is something we should be thinking about. And it was a small group, but culturally very mixed in every way. And they all found it incredibly exciting. I found it exciting. The discussions were great. And it was out of that I thought, I must write some of this. I must get this out there. The mediation community is still quite diverse. So there are probably the majority of mediations are still really coming from the legal background and are still very transactional and problem solving. There's a more transformative group of mediators who are interested in the experience being transformative for everyone, and that means
And longer
everyone
lasting.
including the media, learning more about each other from it, and they are less motivated by getting something signed on the day. Though they usually do, which is important to remember, because I think people go, well, I want a resolution. Yes. And it does divide, the community divides, and there's a lot of people where going into that unknown territory, putting yourself in a humble state as a mediator, a state of uncertainty, and saying, I don't know anything about this. So even if you're working with, Greek shipping company, say, my first questions are, what is it like to be Greek working with the American company that you're in dispute with? What do you see as the differences? I don't know anything about that. I don't know anything about shipbuilding. Give me an understanding. And without doing that, I personally don't think that the process is then mediation. It is a problem-solving process, and good, it's good that happens. But for me, mediation is about gaining another understanding, deeper understanding of why the situation has occurred, and a respect for the differences from each other. So there's been powerful stuff in restorative justice done, and a wonderful case, with a woman who met up with the man who planted a bomb that had killed her father. This is in Ireland.
Oh, I remember. Yeah.
Yeah. And culturally, they were coming from different religious cultures, different social cultures, and different political cultures. Well, politics that had come out of their cultural backgrounds. And they managed to get to a space where she said she totally disagreed still with the fact that it was legitimate to use violence for a good cause, as they would see it.
Mm-hmm.
But having understood that her father hadn't died in some random act of violence helped her. That somebody did feel that there was a reason why they were doing it, which she could understand and could empathise with the reason, if not the action.
Mm-hmm.
And she said she will never stop being a pacifist.
Mm-hmm.
He still believes that there is a place for violent action for the greater good. Mm. And they now travel war zones together to talk about that. So it's not about getting to a point where you give up all your cultural heritage, your beliefs, your values, and go, oh, you're right. It's like, so that's why we're clashing, because we're coming from a cultural set which is different, and we're not taking that into consideration. Mm-hmm. And we can get to the point where we can say, I respect the different aspects. I don't agree with them, mm-hmm. but I respect that they're deeply held.
Yeah. I can see why your February students enjoyed your course so much, because I could just spend the whole day just hearing more of these examples and stories. Yeah. And
I enjoyed them too, because they brought such a lot of different experiences into the room.
Yeah. And I've written down, you said it a couple of times, but starting with respect for the differences is such an interesting dynamic, contrasting terms. Most people wouldn't think of that, but you have to start there in order to find the path to commonality. I think that's
and I think pertinent. It's important that doesn't mean agreeing with or colluding with.
Yes.
And that you're still there to challenge in a transformative way, to go, well, why do you believe that? Or why does that hold? Or how is that in this context? Or is it still serving you? Mm-hmm. There is the whole, it's not just great.
Yeah.
That's really all great. It's like, well, how is that causing stresses and tensions for you? Mm-hmm. Living in the context you're currently living in, which mm-hmm. could be peace, war, living in a different country, whatever it is. So it's like, is it serving you? What do you need to hold tight to? What can you let go of? What can you flex a bit?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I can see so many parallels to corporate deal making in this as well, which I think is probably a foreign concept to a lot of big business deal makers who are looking transactionally. They have very limited time and they just want to get the deal across. But so often they overlook the fact that these are in traditional negotiation, we call them value create scenarios where you've got to maintain something for the longer term, and to treat them transactionally and look at it as a problem solving rather than taking the time to get to know the cultures and the worldview and the belief system of the other will give you limited return. Even if you sign that deal, multi-million-dollar deal, you will still get limited return on that. So I can see so many parallels here. And you mentioned after your February course about writing that down, and that down, I think you're talking about the new book that you've got. And in fact, you've got 2 new books that you're working on. And one of them is about conflict, overlooking culture in conflict. Tell us about both of them. It's very exciting.
I'll start with the other one first, which is about conflict in the music industry.
Exciting.
Which links very much to culture, because the music culture is broad and diverse and also comes from culturally diverse roots. Not that I'm covering any of that in that book, but they're not as disconnected as they may seem. Yeah. So that is about, the kind of disputes you get at all levels, in groups, as individuals, but with managers, with the bigger music industry, etc. And the other group the other book has come directly out of the course. I didn't intend to. In fact, I said I would never write another book, that I was done writing books. I ended up writing.
I'll believe that when I see it. Yeah.
But I thought this was so rich, what was being said by that group, that I thought I want to continue thinking about it. Mm-hmm. And my books, for me, are a way of structuring time for me to think. Might sound a bit odd, but if I don't kind of think, right, okay, I want to think more about culture and mediation, I won't do it unless I can put some sort of structure to it. Mm-hmm. So writing a book on it helps me to legitimise taking time to do the research and saying no to other things and giving it a priority. So I'm looking at that. I've probably written about a third of it. It's due with the publishers in January. So hopefully will appear sometime next year. And it will cover much of what we've spoken about, but because it's with Routledge, that an academic publisher, it will have quite a lot of academic research in there too. Yeah. Looking at also the cultural history of mediation, where it started, what it originally was, what it now is, and how it's developing.
I think that will be a substantial book. I look forward to reading it, like your other books that I have. But again, so pertinent for the corporate leader as well.
Yes.
I think that will be really fascinating to get into that book.
Yeah. And I hope that people don't just read the title and assume that we are talking about
heritage,
shorthand that we use, and that being all it's about, because it is saying, no, we've got cultures. We've got a culture within the deaf community, and it's a culture that even there is split between, should we embrace who we are, or should we try and lip read, or should we try and have a sign language, and how much do we want to engage with the non-deaf world? So every culture is made up of lots of miniature cultures, and it's so lazy to assume that we can lump people together.
Yes, and we do it a lot. Corporate leaders do that a lot under the banner of, well, we're all working for the same company. But you have a number of subcultures that are alive and kicking in that kind of trapped, in fact, like hostages in that single company, being forced to work together.
Yeah, one of my coaching clients, a woman who is in charge of lots of areas in Asia, so Australia, Saudi Arabia, a big area, is having to deal with how she is culturally received as a woman from the Philippines, working in Singapore, how she is perceived by the people who work to her in all those different regions. And that's what our coaching is about. It's about how she can authentically be herself, with an understanding of the cultures of all these organisations and her own culture, the positives that brings and the challenges that brings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I can think of so many different experiences that I've had working internationally and conflicts that have cropped up innocently, but simply because the subcultures, whether it was my heritage or my gender or my position or whatever, and how those interact and rub sometimes, and they create friction and
misunderstandings, because there's an assumption that they understand what you've said or how you've said it, and we're lazy about checking in. And I think sometimes if we think, oh, I didn't quite like that, we have to go back to the person and say, that felt uncomfortable. This is what I'm taking away from what you said. Is that what you meant me to take away?
Yeah.
And the answer is usually no.
Yeah.
Let me explain more, and that's what you're doing in mediation, is let me explain more, let me clarify. Let me deconstruct it and be really as close as I can get to understanding.
Yeah. So important. So important. Monica, I could talk to you all day. This is partly why, because the reason that we're friends. But I could definitely, I'm just captivated, and I'm sitting here going, focus, Kelly, focus. But I could listen to you all day. So I'm going to include in the show notes as normal how people can get in touch with you and work with you. But I also want to mention for any of those folks that are listening and are interested in becoming a mediator, you are hosting, again, the CMC accreditation program this July. Do you want to talk a moment about that?
Yes, thank you. Yeah, if people are interested, and particularly interested in the kind of psychologically informed approach to mediation, each year at Jesus College, Oxford University, in July, we run a 5-day course, and that actually accredits people to work as a mediator at the end of it.
Yeah.
It's split into 2 weeks, so it's 2 days 1 week, 3 days the next week, because it could be the first 2 days, because we have a diversity of people coming, from lawyers to social workers to activists, to all, that actually the first 2 days, whatever you're bringing in culturally, you get a bit of a shock, because most people come in and think, oh, mediation, I can do that because I'm a nice person who can bring people together. And it's so much more than that. So we have 2 days, which can feel a bit mind-blowing, and then a little bit of reflective time, and then 3 days. And it's very much coached role-play sessions. There is some theoretical input, but you get a lot of individual coaching, because we're all different, and we will all be bringing different challenges into how we become mediators. So, anybody who's interested in this July course, there are a couple of places still left. So,
so they need to hurry.
Quickly.
They need to not delay.
And any mediators interested in looking more at culture, I'll be running that course again, probably next February.
Okay. Wonderful. I will include all of those links in the show notes. I should also say, as an added plug, that I studied under Monica when she was teaching with Paul Randolph at Regent's College years ago. And it was a wonderful experience, changed my life. So if you are interested, definitely check it out. It's this July. And as Monica says, there are only a few spaces left. So don't delay. And I just want to say thank you again for coming onto the show. I love having you. We always have such rich, interesting conversations. And I'm excited for your book, your 2 books, but particularly the role of mediation and culture. And I'm looking forward to hearing more about that.
Thanks, Kelly. I always enjoy it too, and it gives me food for more thoughts and more thoughts.
Well, we'll say until next time.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again.
Okay.
And that was our guest, Monica Hanaway. You can see details on how to contact Monica, work with her, and attend her upcoming training in the show notes. And if you enjoyed this podcast and want access to more tips and resources, be sure to give us a like and leave us a review. Thanks for joining today.